and FAO welcome the distinguished panelists and the audience to this workshop on food security and agriculture in the context of climate change. My name is Corinne Fleischer. I work for WFP. I'm the regional director for MENA and Eastern Europe. So this workshop contributes to give concrete messages towards COP27 on the nexus between climate, food security, and nutrition. And also about innovative finance and implementation of solutions at scale for Africa. We are pleased today to have with us distinguished intersectoral panelists, including beneficiaries, governments, international organizations, development financial institutions, and research centers.
Okay.
So please join me to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed El Khousseir, Minister of Agriculture in Egypt, His Excellency, Mr. Adam Auhirsi, State Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Somalia, Dr. Abdul Hakim Elwer, Assistant Director General FAO, Dr. Stanley Samkange, Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships, WFP, Dr. Ali Abu Sabah, Regional Director for Central and West Asia and North Africa, CGIAR, Mr. Vincent Castell, Regional Sector Manager for Agriculture and Agro-Industry in North Africa, Dr. Gainmor Zanamwe, Head of Intra-African Trade Initiative at Afreximbank, and Engineer Nasser Al-Tekair, General Manager of Trade and Business Development, ITFC. A big number of very distinguished panelists. So this event is broadcast virtually, and in addition to our dear audience here with us, we have several participants connecting from different parts of the world. Ahlan wa sahlan to all of you. Just some background for the discussion today. African economies are deeply impacted by climate change. Continent loses between 5 and 15% of gross domestic product due to climate change, despite contributing less than 3% of global CO2 emissions. The global climate crisis is a main driver of global hunger, malnutrition, and migration. With a 2-degree scenario, 189 million people would fall into food insecurity. And with a 4% rise in a 4-degree rise in temperature, this could reach 1.8 billion. In 2021, 22.3 million people were internally displaced by climate shocks, and this could increase to 216 million people by 2050. Africa is highly exposed to an increased risk of hunger due to climate and drought. Food security in Africa decreases by up to 20% with each flood or drought. And it's worsening the already critical situation in the continent, where more than 1 in 5 people faced hunger in 2020. And that's twice the proportion we find in the rest of the world. Climate change impacts nutrition as the food natural value, quantity, and diversity are reduced. In a 3-degree scenario rise, 350 million Africans would be undernourished by 2050. These are dramatic figures. And before we proceed with our moderated discussion, I will first give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed El Khousseir, Egyptian Minister of Agriculture and Land Reclamation. Please, Your Excellency, thank you.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. طبعا برحب بحضراتكم في مصر، بنرحب بحضراتكم جميعا بضيوفنا الكرام طبعا يعني زي ما تحدثنا سابقا في الجلسة الافتتاحية زملائنا، مسألة التغيرات المناخية من أهم المشاكل اللي بتواجه العالم وقضية الأمن الغذائي. يمكن كلنا بنواجه 3 تحديات كبار شفناهم في الفترة اللي فاتت: التغيرات المناخية، جائحة كورونا، الأزمة الروسية الأوكرانية. هذه ال3 تحديات الكبرى أدت إلى تعميق قضية الأمن الغذائي. يمكن شفنا أن أصبحت قضية الأمن الغذائي وقضية المياه وقضية الطاقة من أهم القضايا اللي بتواجه العالم في الفترة الحالية. على صعيد القارة الإفريقية بنجد أن القارة الإفريقية رغم أنها مليئة بالموارد الطبيعية إلا أن قدرتها على مواجهة إجراءات التكيف والتخفيف لمواجهة إجراءات التغيرات المناخية في قضية الأمن الغذائي تحتاج إلى مزيد من التمويل لزيادة قدرات الدول الإفريقية على مواجهة قضايا الأمن الغذائي. أصبحت قضايا الأمن الغذائي أصبح بيطلق عليها قضايا أمن قومي. كثير من الدول بتستخدم حاليا في ظل الظروف الحالية الأمن الغذائي كقضايا سياسية، وبالتالي علينا كلنا كدول نامية وأفريقيا على وجه التحديد إن احنا نتكاتف لأن احنا نواجه قضية الأمن الغذائي. دي نمرة 1. نمرة 2، عايز أتعرض لفكرة مبسطة عشان نبقى كلنا بنتحدث عن مفهوم الأمن الغذائي. كثير من العالم لا يؤمن بقضية بالأمن الغذائي المطلق. لابد ان احنا نتبع قضية الأمن الغذائي النسبي، وهي قدرة الدول على تلبية احتياجاتها سواء من إنتاجها أو من عمليات الاستيراد أو كذا، لأن ده بيعمق مسألة المزايا النسبية وأيضا مسألة التجارة الخارجية. لو بصينا لقطاع الزراعة وقطاع الأمن الغذائي نجد أن قطاع الزراعة من أكثر القطاعات اللي بتتأثر بالتغيرات المناخية وأقل القطاعات تأثيرا في مسألة الانبعاثات الكربونية. يعني قطاع الزراعة ده قطاع أقل تأثيرا في الانبعاثات الكربونية، ولكن هو أكثر القطاعات. على سبيل المثال نجد التغيرات المناخية تؤدي إلى زيادة احتياجات المائية للنباتات، أيضا تؤدي إلى زيادة ملوحة التربة، أيضا بتؤدي إلى تغيير مواعيد الزراعة، أيضا بتؤدي إلى زيادة الأمراض العابرة للحدود، أيضا بتؤثر في احتياجات الفئات الهشة الموجودة في المناطق الهامشية، أيضا بتؤدي إلى تآكل جانب من التربة. يمكن حضراتكم تابعتم الأزمات اللي بيواجهها العالم سواء الحرائق أو خلافه اللي هي بتؤثر إلى مسألة التهجير. يمكن كمان كلنا والعالم هيواجه وبيواجه حاليا فقد آلاف الهكتارات بسبب عملية التصحر، وبالتالي لابد أن ننتبه جيدا. ويمكن إن شاء الله في مؤتمر التغيرات المناخية اللي بتستضيفه الدولة المصرية في نوفمبر القادم، ونأمل أن حضراتكم تبقوا متواجدين معنا، أن لابد أن احنا نتحول والعالم يتحول من مسألة التعهدات إلى مسألة الالتزام الحقيقي، لأن احنا قضايا الأمن الغذائي قضايا مؤثرة، قضايا يعني بتتحكم في مسألة الأمن الغذائي، وبالتالي لابد أن نبحث إلى آليات. قضايا الزراعة عشان نواجه إجراءات التكيف محتاجة مليارات عشان نزيد من قدرة الدول المتأثرة منها تستطيع بناء أنظمة زراعية وغذائية أكثر صمودا وأكثر قدرة على مواجهة التغيرات وأكثر استدامة حفاظا على حقوق الأجيال القادمة. لو أنا يعني رجعت بشكل مبسط على تأثير هذه التغيرات على المزارع البسيط وزيادة قدرته على مواجهة والصمود، هلاقي ان المزارع الصغير محتاج ان احنا نزود له ارشاد زراعي، محتاج ان احنا نزود توعيته ونزود انظمة ونستطيع بناء انظمة انذار مبكر عشان نقدر نزود من قدراته على مواجهة هذه التحديات. ايضا نستطيع ان احنا نزود من قدراته في مسألة الشمول المالي وكيف يستطيع الحصول على تمويل ميسر لانه يقدر يواجه ويقدر يستعيد قدراته في مواجهة هذه التغيرات، لابد ان احنا نأدي ونتوسع. ويمكن عندنا في الدولة المصرية في منظومة الشمول المالي في مسألة البنوك وأسلوب التمويل، وخاصة في التمويل المرتبط بالزراعة والبنوك المتخصصة، ان احنا نزود من قدرات الفلاح والمزارع المصري في انه يتعامل مع البنوك، نزود قدراته في الشمول المالي، وبالتالي يستطيع ان يواجه هذه الأضرار. ايضا لابد ان نؤمن ونبحث عن آليات للتأمين على المحاصيل، لأن مسألة الخسائر والأضرار اللي هيواجهها المزارعين محتاجة ان احنا نبحث ايضا على الآليات لمسألة التأمين على المحاصيل الزراعية. لابد ان احنا نعمل تأمين وأنظمة تأمينية تحمي ثروات الفلاح والمزارع المصري. لابد ان احنا ندعمه في كل هذه المجالات. ايضا لابد ان احنا نتبع أساليب الابتكار ونستنبط أصناف قادرة على مواجهة هذه التغيرات عشان نرفع من مستوى إنتاجيته، أصناف متحملة الملوحة، أصناف مبكرة النضج، قليلة الاحتياج إلى الماء. كل دي عبارة عن دعم للفلاح والمزارع المصري إن يقدر يواجه مثل هذه التغيرات المناخية. إن احنا مسألة بناء الأنظمة زي ما قلت كده، الزراعة من أقل القطاعات بتؤثر في الانبعاثات الكربونية، لكن أكثر القطاعات تأثرا. ومن هذا المنطلق برضو بقول على أفريقيا والدول الإفريقية برضو من أقل الدول اللي هي بتؤثر في الانبعاثات الكربونية، لكن أعتقد أنها تكون أكثر الدول تأثرا بالتغيرات المناخية. وبالتالي لابد أن نبحث عن آليات للتمويل، لابد أن نبحث عن برامج تمويلية ندعم من قدرات هذه الدول على زيادة التجارة البينية، على بناء أنظمة زراعية وغذائية قادرة على الصمود، ان احنا نزود ونجد الآليات ان احنا نحد من التصرفات الغير يعني لائقة في مسألة زي قطع الغابات وخلافه. ايضا مسألة اللي انا عايز اوجه فيها مسألة الري الحديث واستنباط أصناف تتعامل مع نظم الري الحديثة، ولا بد ان احنا نتحول الى أنظمة الري. مسألة المياه واصبحت من القضايا المهمة جدا، وبالتالي لابد ان احنا ندعم قدرات الفلاح والمزارع المصري في ان احنا ازاي يتحول من أنظمة الري بالغمر الى أنظمة الري الحديث. في الدولة المصرية احنا اطلقنا برنامج قومي لدعم الفلاح والتحول من أنظمة الري بالغمر الى أنظمة الري الحديث، بخلاف مشروع القومي اللي بتديره الدولة المصرية في بناء في مسألة يعني تبطين الترع والمسائي، ولكن بنقدم للفلاح تمويل مصرفي على 10 سنين بدون فايدة. وبالتالي مسألة إدماج الفلاح والمزارع المصري في مسألة التعامل مع البنوك، الشمول المالي، دي من المسائل المهمة أيضا في هذا الأمر. وبالتالي احنا عندنا موضوعات كتيرة جدا فيما يتعلق بالزراعة، نتمنى ان احنا ندعم الفلاح، نزيد من قدراته. ايضا لابد ان احنا نبحث عن الفلاح، لان الفلاحين والمزارعين في المناطق الهشة وبصفة خاصة المناطق الساحلية والمتكررة في كثير من الدول سوف يتعرضوا لأزمات نتيجة فقد وظائفهم او فقد الانشطه بتاعتهم. وبالتالي محتاجين ان احنا ننوع من الانشطه اللي تمكنهم من رفع مستواهم. اعتقد ان الدوله المصريه ونماذج كتيره في بعض الدول ان احنا لابد ان ندعم مثل هذه النماذج عشان نزيد من قدراتهم في مواجهه التحديات فيما يتعلق بالتغيرات المناخيه. شكرا، وانا تحت امركم في اي استفسار فيما يتعلق بهذا الامر. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
I can sit here.
Who could tell that the minister is also a banker and clearly calling for financing for the farmers of Egypt and Africa?
توحيد الحيازات أول ما دخل عندنا المشروع من 5 سنوات ما كناش نعرف حاجة عن الحاجات دي طبعا، عن توحيد الحيازات والكلام زي. كونا روابط، احنا بدل ما زراعات مفتتة وبتاع ان احنا نتجمع كليتنا ونبقى واحد في كيان واحد كبير.
كنا الأول بنزرع بالطريقة التقليدية أو البدائية، أما دلوقتي بالطرق الحديثة أصبح في حرات ميكنة، تسوية ليزر، في سطارة، زرع المصاطب، تقاوي عالية الإنتاج ضد تغيرات المناخ.
عاد علينا عائد من الذرة ده يعني ما كناش نحلم بيه.
قبل التطوير المزاجي دي بتاخد في هدر في المية في الوقت، اتساع، لأنه هي طبعا طينية وبتاع بتاخد مساحة كبيرة. اتحول الكلام ده من المساحة الكبيرة دي ل50 سنتي فقط بس. ده طبعا وفر في الأرض. غير كده طبعا كنا برضو بالنسبة للمزاجي قبل التطوير تعمل مشاكل، المية تعدي من فوق المسجد الطيني بالنسبة للحشائش والكلام زي كده، ده كله كان يعمل مشاكل مع المزارعين.
بقى شمسيه يعني ساعدتنا في كل حاجه يعني بالنسبه الوقت كنا ناخده بالديزل 7 ساعات في الفدانين، يعني بقينا ناخده 3 ساعات بس.
بنجيب السفير بندخله في المكنه بيتدور، بيطلع من الناحيه الثانيه زي التبن يعني. بنتعامل معاه وبيتعامل علف للبهايم. بعد حرق السفير كان المحصول يطلع ضعيف. حاليا لما بطلنا نحرق السفير لا المحصول ابتدى يبقى كويس. يعني ما فيش اي حاجه متاثره في اللي طالع ده كله سليم.
السيد
زراعة القصب اللي كانت قديمة
السيد.
بنظام الري الحياض أو بنظام القمر بيستهلك عندنا مياه كثير. لما دلوقتي اتطورت نظم الري الحديثة بنوصل في الزراعة بالري بالتنقيط اللي بيستهلك نص أضعاف المياه القديمة.
يعني بتاع ساعة ونص بنلقى الزرعة بتاعتنا شربت.
فدي فرق النهارده، بتوفر في الوقت، بتوفر في الإنتاجية، بتوفر في استهلاك المياه، بتوفر في الطاقة، وده كله عائد للمزارع وعائد لنا.
ابقى المزارع مفتخر بزرعه وفرحان وعاوز الحكايه دي تستمر.
All right, we will now have 35 minutes, 5 minutes each. A moderated discussion in 3 parts. One is, how does climate change impact food security and nutrition? So what is the problem? Followed by, what are some of the solutions? And then thirdly, how do we finance them? And so we have panelists speaking to all of them. And I'm very pleased to start with the question to His Excellency, Mr. Adam Al-Hirsi. What is the problem?
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, El Sayyid Mohammed Al-Qusayr, and the other distinguished panelists, all protocols observed, I'm very pleased to attend this panel and share with you about what happens in Somalia in the context of climate change when we're talking about food security in our country. Somalis did not live under a very friendly climate in the first place, but for years they used to count on 2 rainy seasons that brought about enough rains for rural farmers to thrive, make surplus, sell some of their food, and for the livestock to also survive. Somalis imported livestock and they imported food. Some of the food is imported from Somalia. Among them were onions and other cash crops. Lately, as climate change happened and it turned into a climate crisis, rains started to fail completely, leaving the Somali rural farmers helpless. Not anything to do or nothing to cultivate. Also lately, rivers started to dry, leaving the irrigation farmers, small-scale farmers, to also be at a disadvantage. For the history in memory, one of the Somali rivers, Shabelle River, have not dried up completely before last year. For 40 years, Somalis did not have 4 consecutive rainy seasons fail. The result become IDBs, people who used to farm and basically provide food for the rest of the country, by selling some of it and surviving on the other, were turned into IDBs. The livestock herders who used to live by their livestock, live in the rural areas, intermarried and went about their businesses, started to converge in very small grazing areas where conflict is emanated from there. A lot of livestock were lost in the process, and we are at a point where we have IDBs who initially, back in the day, the IDBs started to move from the countryside into the small village nearby. Now, the villages are moving into small towns, and small towns are on the verge of collapsing, moving into big urban centers. So we have a situation where we have IDBs upon IDBs, and in turn, those IDBs debase the already fledgling city residents in our country. So that is one aspect of the problem we're facing. Now, when people farmed and normally farmed, and they went about their lives, a lot of others depended on them who did not farm. The teachers of schools, the pharmacists, the teachers of Quranic schools, they depended on the farming system. So now, not only livestock and lives are at risk on farms, the complete livelihoods are abandoned. Only yesterday, we had the UN Relief Chief, Martin Griffiths, taking the bullhorn to himself and declaring that we are in the last minute of the 11th hour of a looming famine in Somalia. We are this close to a famine in pockets of our country. The nexus between climate change and food security is basically as clear as anything could be. You don't have rain in Somalia, the food is not secure. You don't have enough food, there is malnutrition. That is what we are basically facing in Somalia. There is also insecurities. There are also sand dunes that have already covered some of the coastal towns. The town of Hopio, half of it is covered. There are villages swallowed by the sand dunes. The level of the sea is rising. And we are having multiple climate crises on one hand or the other. When it comes to the relationship between the climate change and security, there is also a big nexus. Communities fight over grassing lands. When communities have gathered into a small place, and the potentiality of them having problems among themselves is higher than when they are living, everybody is living peacefully in their own areas that they used to live. We also have floods. The pathways through which, as young children, we went to farms are now creeks because of the climate change. The dust is up everywhere, and when rains fail, they fail. You have disaster. We have a disaster when rains fail. When rains come, we have floods. Almost next day to a rain, you have an emergency in the form of floods. So with all those firsts, the first big-scale drought, 4 consecutive failing rainy seasons, Shabelle River drying up for the first time in the written history of Somalia. We also have another first. Our ministry, the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, is the first one for Somalia. It has been created just in July. So we were tasked with this humongous task where Somalia, our country, is ground zero for climate crisis. No part it played. Somalia is both the ground zero for climate crisis and also most innocent bystander in the game of warming the globe. It has been said time and again, Somalia is the perfect example. Therefore, that's what we are looking at as a country. And I am sure many countries in sub-Saharan Africa are also facing the similar fate. I see people pointing to their watches. I don't know if I use my time. I will say this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Somalia ground zero for climate crisis. That's a stark word, but what you have described shows that it is there. Let me give my second question. Actually, our second panelist is not yet here, so we will move on with our question on what are solutions. My first question goes to my dear colleague Stanley Samkange, World Food Programme Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships. Stanley, could you tell the audience what are some of the cost-effective solutions that can be implemented at scale around climate adaptation and resilience development? Also, in your capacity of chairman of the Development Partners Coordination Group of the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, please tell us what partners, such as international financial institutions, could do to help governments address climate change.
Thank you, Corinne. Excellencies, fellow panelists. Actually, I'm very pleased to follow the two ministers who I think have laid out both some of the challenges, but then also some of the solutions. I want to focus in particular on three big things that I think are necessary, especially if we're going to focus on this issue of how to respond and how to adapt to the changes that we see coming. First relates to investments related to the preparing and containing the impact of what we are facing. Second relates to issues and things that need to be done to help the people who are the most vulnerable and who are suffering from the impact. And then the third relates to food systems, policies, activities, investments that need to be made in the food systems, nationally, regionally, and internationally, if we're to be able to respond effectively to the challenges that are already upon us. First, in the context of preparing and containing the impact of climate change, many of the things we already either see coming or they are already upon us. And there are things that we can and should be doing. Information, better awareness, better preparedness, more investments in forecasting, in being able to understand what are the impacts. This is obviously very important. But much more is needed than that. For example, I was recently in Madagascar and in Mozambique, countries that are suffering from droughts in parts of the countries, but countries that are also hit by massive cyclones, which instead of bringing freshwater resources to the country, actually bring a series of problems. They bring floods, they wipe out infrastructure. These are issues that recur year after year. We see them coming. We need to invest in being able to respond to these kinds of phenomenon so that we turn what is currently a disaster, we actually turn it into a resource. The minister also mentioned issues related to insurance. We need to look at the people that are being impacted. And I would say three things in particular from our experience that we need to look at. First are markets. Whether it's large holders or small holders, markets need to be available for farmers, and we need to do more to make markets available. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be talking about subsistence farming and people who are vulnerable. So the minister also talked about extension services. There are a whole range of things that are needed. but this focus on market and market infrastructure and many of the things that can and should be done to give better access to markets is critical. We as WFP, we buy over $500 million a year in food commodities in Africa. We try and buy from smallholders. We see many of the market bottlenecks, and I think this is a big area of investment. Also, we fully agree insurance for smallholders is critical. Countries that can afford it, big developed countries with large-scale farms, they provide insurance for their farmers. We also need to do that for smallholder farmers. Fully agree with the minister on that. And then lastly, in terms of focusing on people, we need to ensure that now in this more vulnerable environment that we have social protection systems and mechanisms that are in place to provide safety nets for people who are vulnerable. And when a harvest fails or when a disaster hits, people shouldn't automatically be facing life and death situations or facing destitution for generations. So putting in place new, more effective, flexible safety nets is critical. Lastly, the issue of food systems. This whole conference is talking about food security, water, and energy. Water and energy are part of the food system, the global food system. You can't have agriculture without those. And I would add to that something that's very important for us, and that is transport. Transport is actually very closely linked to energy, but if you can't transport food, if you can't move things from one place to another, you're not going to have an effective or efficient food system. So we need to look at the policies that promote countries to be able to trade amongst themselves, especially in Africa, the Continental Free Trade Agreement, but also internal barriers that countries have. And we need to look at the transport infrastructure and network. This is really critical from where we stand as WFP, as big buyers, as people that need to move food commodities from one place to another, either within countries or around the world. Actually, often the biggest bottleneck is the transport system. So investing in a more efficient, more effective transportation is really critical. And as we heard also in the conference, one that doesn't contribute to climate change, but that helps to mitigate it. So I would put these three aspects on the table of areas of investment that we need to have that can help on the response. And these are things that the international community as a whole can and should contribute to.
Thank you, Stan Lake, for clearly laying out where we need to invest for the production to continue and the food to go to the market. I now welcome our panelist, Mr. Ali Sabu Saba from CGIAR. And so we're going to go back one step, Hakim, and go back to the problem. And asking the question to Dr. Ali Abu Saba, CGIAR's Regional Director for Central, West Asia, and North Africa. CGIAR is one of the largest global research actors around the nexus between food security, agriculture, and climate change. What would you think are the main challenges and opportunities for Africa in this regard?
Thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts on this very important subject. Africa has a huge potential in terms of the land, water, and energy that remains largely unexploited. But it's also a continent that has a serious gap when it comes to infrastructure in all forms. Even food production, there are many parts of the continent that has surplus food, but even that food that is produced is not possible to transport it across locations, across countries. So even the whole issue of intercontinental trade remains a serious issue. The African agenda when it comes to climate, you have very important areas. You have the forestry agenda, you have the agriculture agenda, you have the energy to much less extent, but also you have important elements. Africa is the least contributing to the climate change, but it's largest impacted. There remains to be serious mismatch between available means of implementation, that is in the financing, largely around mitigation, and where Africa really needs a lot of adaptation, a lot of funding for adaptation. From a CGIAR perspective, our research cuts across so many different areas, but today I would like to focus on the three key elements you mentioned. Traditionally, research for the past 50 years was focused on increasing food amounts. Very little attention to the nutritional aspects, much less even emphasis on how much water you would consume and how much energy, how do you degrade the lands, what kind of chemicals you would add, and how all of this would affect the environment and health. So as we organize ourselves within the CGIAR, we are trying to keep and take a forward look in a very different way of looking at the way we conduct research by looking at the interconnections among all of these elements. It's very important to continue to produce more food, but you need to produce it in a sustainable way, making it more available of the nutritional food that is needed. Traditionally, countries have focused on research in very few commodities, whereas the greatest potential of African agriculture has largely been untapped. A lot of focus on select commodities that are not necessarily the most adapted to climate change. So what we try to do is to leverage the CGIAR innovations that have been produced over the past 50 years, but then taking a fresh look at how you can adapt those to become more resource efficient in terms of taking technologies into farmer fields. How do you pay greater attention to the interaction between water, the exploitation of land, especially new land, and of course recognizing that in Africa you are starting a lot of locations almost afresh. So you have a great opportunity, like the penetration of a mobile telephony in Nigeria. You're starting from a very low base, and now you have almost 2.1, 2.2 sets per person. So how can you now leverage these innovations, these new technologies, in a way to help raise awareness across farmers, take better messaging and extension support to farmers, leveraging technology, and then trying to let the youth and the people across the continent think in a way that looks at those interactions among water, among energy, and about the food and the way we consume it. Last is, traditionally there has been far less emphasis on the sustainable diets, sustainable and healthy diets. And I think going forward in the future with increasingly decreasing amount of natural resources, we need to focus more on what is the most nutritious food that we need to produce. How can we make it known to the youth and to the elderly about the positive impacts of consuming better and healthy diets? And we have learned a lot of lessons from the recent corona pandemic. Taking care of your good health could already take you a very long way. So this is a very briefly some of the thoughts around the topic that you've just mentioned.
Thank you very much. Yes, and clearly coming back to the transport issue that Stan Lake mentioned, but also now looking at how to adopt more resource-efficient ways of production and using technology. Thank you very much. So we now go back to the solutions. Dr. Abdul Hakim Alwer, my dear friend, FAO Assistant Director General, Regional Representative, could you please share with the audience what are some of the climate-smart initiatives that are being implemented for food security and agriculture?
Corinne, thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks to Excellencies for setting the stage, and our colleagues Stan Lake and Ali Abu Saba also addressing different issues. I think when we talk about food and climate, the solutions are very much coming from the problems or understanding the problems, which is highlighted by Excellencies the Ministers, and we know them very well. We heard today in the opening with John Kerry, the Special Envoy, highlighting the importance of following science, and that's why we are here. And I very much, and we do at FAO, of course, support evidence-based and science-based solutions. that would address the exact problem and will make sure that we have a sustainable solution. The reason is that if we leave rural communities that are usually incapable, and the ministers highlighted the challenges they see in their rural areas, the rural community would tend to haphazard or ad hoc solutions that would turn their livelihood to even worse situation. And in the future, they cannot cope with it because it's not a science-based one, although it's based on conditions, and it will always happen that the problems drag and keep dragging downwards. In the case of the climate-related issues, and Corinne, you know that we recently have been in the north of Delta where we saw the seawater intrusion as a result of climate change, flooding in a number of fertile agricultural lands, where FAO is promoting resilient agriculture and introducing some new crops that can cope with the salinity of the water in the region. Now that's based on scientific evidence and of course testing that came from CGIR, AXAT, and we have the FAO IAEA Center in Vienna that does also a lot on seawater intrusion, and it is based on all that as a solution to address some of the climate challenges. There are other solutions that were applied in the Upper Egypt of replacement of heavy water demanding crops such as sugarcane with different varieties to reduce on the water consumption, and that's clearly a solution that deals with water scarcity, which is becoming worse as a result of the climate change. Of course, some of these issues would require a lot of support on different directions, and I'll come in a minute to state some of those. But very importantly, we have to also address the issue of water accountability, efficiency, and sustainability. And we have one of the biggest projects at the regional level that we carry at FAO on water efficiency and sustainability and accountability. And the reason is to really raise awareness, but also help countries to establish legal frameworks that would oversee how water accountability is handled in light of the continuing water scarcity in the region and the climate change. So that is more of a long-term solution that would allow more or bring more awareness on, especially in the rural areas, of the use of the water. Where we think with the WFP and other agencies also need to work is really on developing science and evidence-based solutions on the actual consumption of food products. And you may say why, because there's always, some people ask, oh, we don't have enough food. We already are about 7 billion, and what we will do when we reach 10 billion. What we don't know as a fact that there's 30% of that food is wasted. And so we're actually already producing enough food for 10 billion people on the globe, and we're wasting 30% of it, and that is what we are in. So we really need to look at ourselves as not only on the upstream, but also the downstream of how do we change the habits so that we reduce on the demand on the food in a more healthy diet manner, so that we can scale down on the depletion of our water resources and land resources. Finance and financial inclusion, we always talk and call about ODAs, of course, only providing 10% of the total SDGs demand, which applies the same to various SDGs. But we're always keep aside in a way the finance required at the small farmer holders. We know that today we have over 70% of our food is produced by small farmer holders. And if we do not provide support to that category of farmers, we will be in trouble specifically because we cannot sustain that food production that we need. And these are small farmer holders that do not have capacity for themselves to build solutions and apply it. And I'm glad to see the CEO of Alex Bank here with us today, and we had interactions and discussions on how do we encourage and the outreach and the financial inclusion for the small farmer holders through more easily accessible microfinance solutions. So these are very important tools that would allow the small farmer holders to improve their efficiency and adapt to climate change. The last point, Corinne, I would like to highlight, and we spoke a lot about the engagement of the private sector. Private sector will not come if the model that we're providing is not attractive and does not generate a profit. There's no private sector on earth that will do volunteering unless they come through their corporate social responsibility program or philanthropy program. Otherwise, we have to think creatively, what is it in it for them to come and provide solutions. And one way that drives the private sector is the market-oriented solution. So any solution that leads to a marketing product, the private sector will come there. Of course, there are other tools on the taxation and incentive tools that can be injected in the financial system that will encourage the private sector to engage more. But I think we need to be more creative. We know that we cannot make it alone. The governments cannot do it alone. The multilateral system cannot do it alone, and we need more cash, and that cash will not come on a voluntary basis. It will come on a profit basis. We have to be very clear, and we should allow that, but we see how do we create a conducive environment for us. But that would require us to provide the solutions that would drive the private sector to generate and create jobs. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Hakim. Thank you very much for your evidence, science, and market-oriented solutions and tools for smallholder farmers. We are moving on to how will we finance this. I have my first question to Mr. Vincent Castell, Regional Sector Manager for Agriculture and Agro-Industry in North Africa, African Development Bank. Mr. Castell, we're glad to have you as part of this panel, the perspective of the African Development Bank. With most global climate finance dedicated towards climate mitigation solutions, how is the AFDB working with partners to mobilize financial resources for climate adaptation and resilient development in Africa?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm in charge of North Africa, but also Central Africa and Nigeria, which gives me a good perspective of the different issues facing agriculture when it comes to climate change adaptation, because the issues are sometimes extremely different. First of all, I would like to thank WFP for the invitation to engage in a workshop that could not be more timely. Today, Africa is being faced by a series of overlapping crises. Governments are still dealing with the impact of the COVID-19 crisis which has impact in terms of financing. They have to deal with a spike in energy, food, and other commodity prices as the conflict in Ukraine continues. And what we have seen recently this year and has been exacerbated is the adverse impact of climate change on the populations and agriculture in particular. And if you look at the numbers, according to FAO, over 50 million Africans have been pushed back into poverty this year, and 170 million have been made more food insecure. And these multiple stresses have once again highlighted the urgent need for greater and smarter investments, and I insist on that, greater and smarter investment in across the value chain. However, as stressed out by the number and severity of drought and heat wave this year, taking climate change adaptation issues into account is becoming paramount for the sustainability of what we finance and what we do collectively in this panel. And when we talk about the financing of adaptation to climate change, and I think that integrates a lot of the comments that have been made before by the other panelists, there are two major remarks that I would like to make and see after that how we address this through our financing instruments. The first one is that at the level of agriculture, solutions, and I would say evidence-based solutions, as it was mentioned before by FAO, they exist and they must be supported. What is now really becoming paramount is that their use is being systematic, both in space, through the scaling up of the various initiatives that we have, and in time, whether the intervention is an emergency or a long-term intervention. And financing instruments and policies may take this into account as a matter of urgency. The second thing is, and we talked about transportation and other sectors, is that the issue of adaptation to climate change is primarily in our sector about agriculture, water, and the environment. And this is what is bringing us here today. But it's also a transversal issue. And the approach, according to the actual water energy nexus, which is being promoted by Egypt, is really fundamental. But breaking down silos is important, but it requires that we also break down silos when it comes to our financing instruments and when we come to the design of our operations. So on the first part, the FDB has adopted a structured approach, and we are now in a phase of acceleration and scaling up, of mobilizing technologies and promoting these technologies in our investments, regardless their time horizon, whether it's an emergency or a long-term investment. Technologies to feed Africa in the face of climate change exist or being developed, but what has been lacking is a comprehensive approach to finance them and take them to scale with accountability for impact. So in that regard, this is what we have been doing through TAT, which is the Technologies for African Actual Transformation, Technology and Innovation Delivery Platform, which is supported by the bank and in collaboration with the CGR. And here, that was launched two years ago, and the TAT platform has delivered heat-tolerant varieties to 1.8 million farmers in 7 countries, increasing wheat production by 1.2 million metric tons. And if we take, for example, the case of Sudan, this allowed Sudan to double its wheat production, and Sudan now expects to be fully self-sufficient in wheat within the next 3 years. And this is this approach that we are now promoting in all our financing instruments. Indeed, if we take our ADF, which is our African Development Fund, our target is that at least 40% of the ADF financing will aim climate finance, and 50% of this financing will support climate change adaptation activities. In the case of agriculture, the African Development Bank expects to invest $10.5 billion over the next 5 years to boost agri value chains across the continent, and climate change adaptation activities will be part of all these investments. Out of this regular stream of activities, we have recently launched the African Emergency Food Production Facility as a response to the food crisis caused by the event in Ukraine and the recent drought. This is a short-term intervention facility to produce food, soybean, maize, rice over the next 2 years. The FDB has committed $1.5 billion to the initiative, but cognizant that we need now to include adaptation activities in all these projects, regardless of their time horizon, we have been promoting TAT activities in all these investments as part of the AFPF as a response to the recent food crisis. Sorry. However, these resources are not enough. So to put these activities to scale, we are now launching the Mission 1 for 200 in collaboration with IFAD, a financing facility to support food and nutrition in Africa, which will give African farmers support to adapt to climate change. The objective is to mobilize $1 billion to double productivity of crops, livestock, and fish production, and to produce an additional 100 million metric tons of food to feed 200 million Africans, and reduce hunger by 80%. As I was saying at the beginning, these instruments, financing instruments, they focus on agriculture. But we need to work across sectors. So in this regard, the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, AAAP, which is a joint initiative between the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation, it aims to mobilize $25 billion over the next 5 years to accelerate and scale climate adaptation activities across the continent. This is structured around 4 pillars, and I will end on this. Climate smart digital technologies for agriculture, African infrastructure resilience accelerator pillar to scale up new technologies to adapt urban and rural infrastructure, the youth empowerment for entrepreneurship and job creation in climate adaptation and resilience pillar, in order to develop the skills of 1 million Africans to prepare for green jobs and entrepreneurial activities, and finally, the innovative financial initiative for Africa pillar. As Africa receives less than 4% of global finance due to an inability to access existing international funds, this pillar will support African countries in mobilizing these funds. We'll have two mechanisms. One mechanism that will be housed by the Global Center on Adaptation, which will help countries to prepare projects, and the other one, which will be a downstream investment facility housed by the bank, and the bank intends to put $12.5 billion into this investment facility to support project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Clearly, a lot of interesting, how much the 40% you're going to put into climate finance, and of which half of that into adaptation. So clearly a move by the African Development Bank towards climate smart agriculture. I now get my second question to Dr. Gainmore Zanamwe, Director of Trade Facilitation at Afreximbank. And my question to you is, Afreximbank, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, and WFP recently signed an MOU to finance climate-smart agriculture that support smallholder farmers and contribute to African agriculture production, value addition, and intra-Africa food trade. Could you tell us more about how facilitating financing for trade and sustainable supply chains within the context of AFCTA could support food security in the continent?
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is a very important topic, which is at the heart of what the African Export-Import Bank does, and it is one of the reasons why we actually established, because when you look at issues to do with intra-African trade, they are very close to most of the issues that have been discussed. When you talk about smallholder farmers, I think I want to focus on that. The bigger guys, they know their way, they know how to deal with some of these challenges, but the people who are being impacted by climate change are the smallholder farmers. I've seen also in the SME sector, these are the people who are being impacted. And in Africa, we also have got women in particular. We see a lot of them moving from one country to another, crossing borders, maybe carrying $100 to go and buy food. So these are some of the challenges we've been seeing. And we've been saying, from Afreximbank, how do we then intervene to assist these people? And I was glad that when World Food Program came and the AFCFTA Secretariat, we were basically aligned in our thinking. The MOU we signed focuses squarely on how to address the needs of smallholder farmers. There's that pillar which focuses on how to finance smallholder farmers to be able to actually produce food and actually trade it. There's another pillar that focuses on intra-African trade, and at the center of this, we've got climate action interventions that are going to be interwoven into these other pillars. And also, we are now looking at capacity building, advisory services. We are looking at assessing the developmental impact of the initiatives that we'll be implementing with the World Food Program. The interesting thing about this unique MOU that we signed is that we are going to be starting from the market. We will actually look at what is the demand from the market. And this is what will then help you to go and aggregate the products that are produced by smallholder farmers. And once you have a market, that is an incentive already for the people to go and put seed on the ground and grow whatever they grow, because the market is there. The offtakes are very, very important. and the whole structure becomes bankable. So these are some of the initiatives we are working on, and the bank was already working on a concept which we call Export Trading Companies Initiative, which fits nicely into the program that we have with the World Food Program, because what it does is basically to aggregate products that are produced by smallholder farmers and then take them to the market. One of the biggest challenges that we've actually seen, and that explains why intra-African trade is also very low, is lack of market information. When these smallholder farmers produce their goods, they don't know where to sell them. Egypt may be producing oranges here when South Africa is off-season. You need that information that South Africa is now off-season. Send your oranges to South Africa. We can use the AfCFTA, African Continental Free Trade Agreement, to ensure that oranges from Egypt, they enter South Africa duty-free. So these are some of the practical things that we are looking at. And also, I think my colleague from FDB talked about the impact from Ukraine-Russia crisis. That is also something that has impacted food crisis in the continent. We need to do more in terms of importing fertilizer, yes, to fight the fire. But the long-term objective should actually to see African fertilizer plants manufacturing, producing fertilizer that is needed by our farmers on the continent. This is the only way in which we can become sustainable. And the World Food Program is now working with the bank to see how best we can facilitate, first and foremost, the importation of fertilizer, but long term, we want to work on supporting the African private sector to go and produce the fertilizer and other inputs that are required by the continent. This is what we need, and I think for those who listened to President Sisi speaking during the Afrexim Bank AGM, he was talking about African solutions to African problems. This is what we need to focus on. The last issue that I want to highlight is that we've also provided about 6 billion to facilitate the importation of food as a result of the Ukraine crisis, wheat, fertilizer, etc. So we'll be reaching out to a number of ministers responsible for trade, agriculture, to see how best we can actually help you to be prepared for the next farming season, which is just around the corner. But at the end of the day, we want now to use the AfCFTA to create that single market that will facilitate the production and the trading of products. When one country is affected by drought, by floods, another country in Africa should be better off. And we should be able to allow these countries to be able to trade with each other. For example, when there was drought in East Africa, in Southern Africa, we used to import maize from East Africa. These are some of the opportunities for trading under the AfCFTA. And I want to close with the issue of technology and give a very practical example. What we saw in South Africa, when we were growing up, some of us, we were using hoes to dig and put the seed on the ground. But now with the technology, you can just go and press a button, and then you will see things happening on their own. There's a firm in South Africa that has just developed a hydrocop, whereby you can actually grow up close to 1,600 broilers in a 9 square meter cubicle. You can actually grow 1,500 broilers within 25 to 30 days instead of 3 months. You can actually do strawberries not in 8 or 9 months, but in 3 months. You can do lettuce not in 3.5 months, but in 21 days. This is the advantage of technology. You utilize technology, you make farming sexy, sustainable, and smart. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zanamawa. You know, when we did our Purchase for Progress program with WFP, one thing that we really realized is the spark that gets farmers, smallholder farmers, overcome all hurdles is to know that there is a buyer who takes his food. And so really, I look forward on that implementation together on the MOU to look at what the market needs. And we're going to get our friend Hakim into this because he speaks about fertilizers everywhere and has also educated me about fertilizers quite a bit. So my third question on the solutions goes to Engineer Nasser Al-Tekayer, General Manager of Trade and Business Development, ITFC. What support is the Islamic Development Bank providing member states to address the global food crisis?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Your Excellency, Minister from Egypt, Your Excellency, Minister from Somalia, distinguished panelists, and distinguished audience. So just to put things in perspective, when we refer to the IDB, we refer to the Islamic Development Bank Group, because the group is comprised of several windows. You have the mother institution, the bank, which focuses on public sector. You have ITFC, which is the trade arm. You have ICD, which is the private sector. You have ISIC, which is the insurance, and you have the research institute. So it's quite a diverse group that covers several areas. Now, setting the context from where we're sitting, the IDB group has 57 member countries. 36 of them are net food importers, and 26 out of those 36 are low-income food deficit member countries. So for us, this is a clear priority to take action on because it puts at risk the implementation of SDG 1 and SDG 2. For that reason, the group has developed the Food Security Response Program, FSRP. So it's a $10.5 billion program for 3 years. Now, the bulk of the program, around $5+ billion, will be by the bank, 4 point something from ITFC, the trade finance, and the rest or the remaining is with the insurance arm as well as the private sector. What is interesting to note is that within the FSRP, there is clear focus, or a large bulk of the program is dedicated to resilient and climate smart agriculture, because we realize that a key issue in resolving food security lies in or within solutions to climate challenges and smart agriculture. If I were to focus on ITFC, the trade arm and the institution that I'm working for within the group, agriculture and trade or agriculture and food security is in the heart of the work that ITFC does, and that's why almost half of the package, of the food security package, is coming from the part of trade. Just to give you an example of some of the initiatives that we are doing in ITFC to support farmers. For example, in Egypt, we are working with UNIDO under the Better Cotton Initiative to train smallholder farmers to grow cotton in a sustainable manner. We have programs with OCP Africa in Senegal. A lot of talk has been happening on fertilizer. So our work with OCP in Senegal, what we call is the OCP School Lab. Now this helps farmers determine the appropriate type of fertilizer as well as quantity, given we all realize now the price of fertilizer are going. So this leads to efficiency, as well as choosing the right type of fertilizer will help increase the yield. Similar program we're engaged with is in Cote d'Ivoire, again with OCP Africa, which is the Agri-Booster. Again, it focuses on proper selection of fertilizer as well as farming techniques that will help, in our estimate with OCP Africa, will help increase the yield, triple if not double if not triple the yield of rice production. And also in ITFC, we believe in linking the capacity building to financing. To give a concrete example for that, I will borrow an example from our work in Indonesia, where ITFC is financing the coffee exporters. So we go up to the level of the cooperative, and we finance directly the coffee exporters. This way, they do not have to wait for 2, 3, 4 months to get paid, which has an impact on their livelihood from one side. From the other side, we extend good agricultural practices training for them. And that training has elements of climate adaptability and to help the farmers grow their coffee in a more sustainable and climate resilient manner. So this is just an example of the engagements that we have in ITFC, where we join our technical assistance with our financing to build long-term resilience of farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe, Your Excellency, we've heard about, what is needed: resilient crops, water-efficient irrigation, technology, transport, financing. What is your reaction to what you heard?
طبعا في البداية بشكر يعني السيدة مديرة الجلسة، وبشكر كل المتحدثين على الأفكار والمقترحات اللي قالوها. لكن دعوني ان انا يعني بس طالما ان احنا بنتحدث عن التمويل، لابد نفرق ما بين حاجتين. لابد نفرق بين التمويل الذي يساعد الدول على بناء أنظمة زراعية وغذائية قادرة على الصمود، وبالتالي ده مسؤولية مؤسسات التمويل الدولية وشركاء التنمية، ومسؤولية الدول الكبرى التي تسببت في الانبعاثات الكربونية. لابد ان احنا ناخد هذا الامر في الاعتبار، ان كثير زي ما قال السيد جون كيري ان 20 دولة تسببت في 80% من الانبعاثات الكربونية، ولابد ان تتحمل هذه الدول مسؤولياتها تجاه الدول التي تأثرت كثيرا، ومنها كثير من الدول الافريقية. وبالتالي لابد ان نفرق بهذا التمويل الذي يجب ان تتبناه مؤسسات التمويل، الدول الكبرى، كل شركاء التنمية، بأساليب وآليات وقدر من التمويل يتناسب مع برامج واحتياجات هذه الدول على بناء هذه الأنظمة وقدرتها على التكيف. ده نمرة واحد. نمرة اتنين، عايز أقول إن قطاع الزراعة يحتاج إلى برامج تكيف أكثر من برامج التخفيف، لأن برامج التخفيف قد تؤثر على القدرات الزراعة في مواجهة احتياجات الأمن الغذائي، ولا بد إن احنا نركز على برامج التكيف. برامج التكيف محتاجة قدر كبير من التمويل. أرجو أن مؤسسات التمويل يعني تطلع بمسؤوليتها في هذا الأمر. أما فيما يتعلق بالتمويل الذي يمكن صغار المزارعين والمربين على الصمود ومواجهة احتياجاتهم وتمكينهم من ممارسة نشاطهم وتمكينهم من الصمود، فأعتقد زي ما تحدث زملائي على مسألة الشمول المالي، ولا بد ان احنا نزيد من قدراتهم على التعامل المصرفي وتوفير آليات تمويل. واعتقد ان الدولة المصرية ومعانا زملاء خبراء في مجال التمويل المصرفي والشمول المالي، ان احنا نيسر لهم التمويل بأساليب ميسرة وبتكلفة اقل تمكنهم من انهم يقدروا يواجهوا هذه التحديات. دي نمرة اتنين. نمرة تلاتة، مسألة الخسائر والأضرار. لابد ان احنا نعي جيدا مسألة التأمين على المحاصيل الزراعية، وناخد في الاعتبار ان احنا نقدر نوجه لهم برامج للتأمين على هذه المحاصيل لمواجهة هذه الأزمات. ده فيما يتعلق بالشق التمويل. أما فيما يتعلق بشق الحلول، فأعتقد أن أنا أقولها في عبارات مبسطة. أولا، لابد ان احنا ندعم أنظمة الإنذار المبكر، لابد ان احنا نقدم دعم في مثل هذه الأنظمة. نمرة اتنين، لابد ان احنا نزود ونرفع من قدرات المزارعين والفلاحين، من قدراتهم على تحقيق الاستفادة من برامج الشمول المالي من خلال تدريب وتعميق وزيادة التوعية لدى المزارعين والمربين في مجال الشمول المالي. مسألة وصولهم إلى الأسواق ونفذهم إلى الأسواق وتعميق سلاسل القيمة، ده من الحاجات اللي محتاجة ان احنا ندعم صغار المربين والمزارعين عشان يقدروا يسووا منتجاتهم ويقدر يسوقها، وبالتالي بيحقق الربحية المناسبة. ايضا لابد ان احنا نزود قدر من التوعية، سواء من خلال الارشاد الزراعي، سواء من خلال المدارس الحقلية زي ما قال بعض الزملاء. لابد، ويمكن اذا سمحوا لي الزملاء ان تحدثوا كثيرا عن موضوع الأسمدة، اعتقد ان منظومة الري الحديث تقلل كثيرا من احتياجات السماد، تقلل كثيرا من التكلفة. ايضا علينا ان احنا نتجه ونعمق مسألة السماد العضوي والسماد الحيوي. ايضا يمكن الدولة المصرية عملت حاجة جديدة في هذا الأمر وإحنا نشرناها، مسألة الخريطة الصنفية وخريطة التربة، إن إحنا بنعمل بحث وتصنيف للتربة على مستوى الأقاليم والمناطق المختلفة، وبالتالي بنحدد عناصر التربة في كل مكان، وبالتالي بنحدد احتياجات التربة دي من الأسمدة والمواد الكيماوية بما يتناسب مع طبيعتها، وبالتالي بنرفع من كفاءة استخدام السماد، بنؤدي إلى زيادة الفاعلية والكفاءة. أيضا الخريطة الصنفية، يمكن احنا نشرنا الخريطة الصنفية فيما يتعلق ببعض المحاصيل زي القمح والفول وبعض المحاصيل الأخرى، وإن شاء الله قريبا في مسألة الذرة، إن احنا بنحدد عندنا أصناف كتيرة من نوعية المحاصيل، لكن بنحدد أي من الأصناف يصلح في المنطقة دي وأي من الأصناف يصلح في المنطقة الأخرى، وبالتالي بنزود من كفاءة الإنتاجية ونعظم من إنتاجية الفلاح والمزارع. أيضا لابد إن احنا نبني من أنظمة في المناطق الهشة، المناطق القريبة من السواحل، لابد إن احنا نلجأ. يمكن زميلنا في معالي وزير البيئة في الصومال تحدث عن الأمطار والفيضانات والمناطق الهشة، لابد ان احنا نلجأ الى اساليب غير تقليدية، لابد ان مؤسسات التمويل الدولية لابد انها تساعد هذه المناطق الهشة في بناء انظمة زي حصاد مياه الامطار، زي زراعة الوديان، زي تطوير هذه المناطق. لابد ان احنا نرفع من كفاءة زملائنا المزارعين وساكني هذه المناطق الهشة. ايضا لابد ان احنا نلجأ الى مسألة الزراعة التعاقدية عشان نسهل الفلاح والمزارع ان يبقى عارف اقتصاديات التشغيل واقتصاديات العائد. واعتقد الزراعه التعاقديه، انظمه الري الحديثه ايضا والياتها ونجاحها. برضو مساله زي ما قال بعض الزملاء، مساله الفاقد، نسبه الفاقد في المحاصيل ونسبه في خلال مراحل الدوره الانتاجيه، في خلال مراحل الحصاد حتى الاستهلاك، لابد ان احنا نبحث عن اليات لتقليل الفاقد وبالتالي تعظيم الانتاجيه. ايضا لابد ان احنا نعي كمان مساله تغيير انماط الاستهلاك، بخلاف ان احنا بنعدل انظمه الانتاجيه، لابد ان احنا نبحث عن انظمه الاستهلاك ونعدل من انظمه الاستهلاك بما يتناسب مع الوضع اللي احنا فيه، وبالتالي بنقلل من مساله الفاقد في العمليه الانتاجيه. زي ما قال زميلنا نقطه اخيره في مساله قصب السكر، احنا كدوله مصريه بنقدم حلول لمساله قصب السكر، بنعمل زراعه بالشتل، بنقدم نظم ري حديثه، وبالتالي بنحافظ على الانتاجيه، بنزود الانتاجيه، كمان بنحافظ على منتج مهم لبعض الفئات في اهالينا في الصعيد، وبالتالي بنقدم لهم كل الدعم في هذا الامر. نقطه اخيره، مساله التصنيع الزراعي لزياده القيمه المضافه. لابد ان احنا كدول افريقيه عندنا موارد طبيعيه كتيره، لابد ان احنا نعظم من القيمه المضافه، نزود الانتاجيه، وبالتالي بنزود من الموارد المتاحه للدول في هذا الامر. دي نقط بسيطه حبيت ان انا القي الضوء عليها. مرة أخرى بشكر حضراتكم جميعا وبشكر السادة الحضور. يعني شكرا.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. And thanks to all the panelists. Now, before we go into questions, we're already over time, but before we go into questions from the audience, I would like to hear from each one of you in 10 seconds. What would be one concrete message around food security and nutrition that you would like to be considered towards COP27? So let's start with Engineer Nasral Tekair. What is your message? 10 seconds.
10 seconds. Food security is affected by many reasons: climate change, rising fuel prices, disruption in supply chains. So it takes the work of everybody: governments, international, developmental, financial institutions, and the private sector. It takes everybody to work together, each building on their own comparative advantage to be able to solve this. So it's call for action for everybody together. Thank you.
Thank you. Hakim.
Well, let me start by think globally and act locally. We need solutions that are thought, designed, and developed at local context. Globally available technologies are not necessarily always attainable, accessible, and usable for some local communities, so we need to think of solutions that are tailored to the local context. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Genmo Zandamwe.
Yes, thank you. I think I want to start
10
address.
seconds,
Yes.
not addressing.
Yes, you have already taken 1 second from me, so 11. So I want to put trade at the center of this. So we've got the AFCFTA. I want us to approach the issue of climate change on how we can actually use trade as an instrument to address climate change with a particular focus on women, youth, and smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Adam Auhersi.
And I would like to say, a climate crisis, it looks to me like the climate crisis is secondhand smoking in a larger scale. And when it comes to nutrition, there is no nutrition where there is no food at all, and some food insecurities are real. Thank you.
Thank you. We give it to Stan Lake and we'll let the minister at the end because he will bring it to COP, to Sharm el-Sheikh. So Stan Lake.
أنا يعني عايز أقول إن في 10 ثواني الأمن الغذائي قضية أمن قومي، الابتكار الزراعي والزراعة الذكية والزراعة الرقمية أمر في غاية الأهمية، التمويل المناسب مع الظروف مطلوب وبقوة، بناء الحاجة إلى بناء أنظمة زراعية وغذائية قادرة على الصمود، قضية المياه في غاية الأهمية.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Stan Lake.
Yes, I would emphasize the importance of markets, markets and transport, which leads you to supply chain, and that also leads you to issues related to trade.
Thank you.
I already have one. My message?
Yes.
Yeah. Technologies, I think technologies to feed Africa in the face of climate change exist. We need to take them to scale through much greater financing and by systematically as well applying them.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Vincent Castel and Dr. Ali Abou Sabah.
Investment in science, technology, and innovation will have to be key to adapt and to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change.
Thank you very much. That was very clear from all of you. We now go to the audience and open for questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Norhal Saber, and I'm the president of the Egyptian American Youth Group organization based in New Jersey, USA. Right now, right here, I'm very privileged to be standing in front of you all. I find food insecurity in agriculture a huge issue for us to be considering it not just a workshop. I think we deserve it to be inside the summit hall for more people to, for this issue to be promoted, for more solutions to be addressed. Right now, my question is in regards to the small farmers. They need you on site, not on the stage. I'm sorry. They need your financing. They need your cooperation. They need you to visit them annually because right now in Egypt, we're the host of Sharm el-Sheikh COP27. I mean, Sharm el-Sheikh is the host of COP27. And everyone will be here. And what will we show them? We want to show them that we are visiting all the farmlands and all the small farmers. My father, he has a land in Venezuela. It's around 3,000 acres. And right now, he is working alongside research scientists. And we found out a solution that could help desertification. And it's very necessary that I voice this solution. Prickly pear cactus. Prickly pear cactus is what we colloquial here in Egypt call it tinshoki.
Okay, but can you make it very short? And what is your question to the panelists?
My question, I'm so sorry for taking so much of your time. My question would be, will you be visiting small farmer sites here in Egypt alongside in regards to COP27 next November?
Who wants to take that question? Yes.
Please.
The Minister.
سوري محمد يعقوب عندنا احنا مزارعين جبناهم for this session. مين المزارعين اللي معانا هنا؟ Small farmers. Small. These are smallholder farmers that are working on their projects supported by FAO, and they brought here for the right session to showcase some of the climate smart solutions that they are already implementing, was under the Ministry of Agriculture. Yes, we do go to the ground together with the Ministry of Agriculture. We have a heavy presence. We have field farmer schools in every governorates, and we do interact directly with the farmers. And you mentioned Beni Suef. On the 3rd, 4th of October, we have a workshop by FAO on the fall armyworm. And there's a planned visit to Beni Suef for the whole delegation of the workshop.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
أنا يعني برحب بالزميلة، لكن عايز أقول إن صغار المزارعين محل اهتمام مننا جدا، يمكن معانا زملاء من الزراعين زي ما قال الدكتور كده. إحنا صغار المزارعين كل مؤسسات التمويل بتيجي هنا مصر بتزورهم وبنقدم لهم كل الدعم وإحنا موجودين معاهم. لكن بس عايز أقول ملحوظة أخيرة، 3000 في قطار يعني 10,000 فدان، ده مزارع مش صغير، ده مزارع يعني كبير شوية يعني. شكرا.
We have a second question.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you very much for this great workshop. My name is Carolina Urmeneta. I'm from the Global Methane Hub, and I want to bring another issue, and it's regarding methane mitigation. We have the Global Methane Pledge that we need to report at COP27, and I want to know if you are thinking about maybe using some additives or innovation in order to have food security for the farmers, mainly regarding meat and everything. It's just to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Who will take that question? Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is a very important question. Within the CGIAR agriculture research, there are programs that are looking at livestock in general and what kind of emissions they will produce. Just for those who don't know, a cow would actually emit almost the same amount of greenhouse gas emissions as a car. So if you have a country like Ethiopia, 200 million heads, Zimbabwe, South Africa, very, very large numbers. So it is definitely an area to be focused on. The research that we're trying to do is to look at the different combinations of animal feed that will give the right level of nutrition to the animals, but then reduce the amount of emissions that would come from this. And I think Brazil has been leading in this work almost 10 years ago with funding from the World Bank, and the CGIAR is taking some of these technologies across several African countries.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sava. Yes, please.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Abdul Ghaffar. I am also from Somalia. I'm the Deputy Finance Minister for Somali government. I actually, we are together with His Excellency, the Minister of Environment. Thank you very much, the panelists and the moderator. You already told us the challenges of the climate change, and you also tell us the solutions and how we finance. But above all, listening on your different comments, I somehow feel it feels like some countries like Somalia, which is actually confronting a multi-faceted problems, like insecurity, not food security, but the insecurity, instability caused by the terrorists, a country which is fragmented, who has been actually confronting similar problems for over 20 years, and shares other problems globally like COVID-19 pandemic, and also the human capital gaps in terms of the knowledge for in relation to the agriculture and the farming and all that. It feels like the kind of discussion and the solutions that has been proposed are very much tailored to the context that has already been doing something. such countries that has already been connected to the international financial institutions, and the countries that are already been doing something in terms of small farming and all that. So my question is, is there any solutions that you think we as Somalis can do as a government to attract or to bring the private sector, the international private investors to Somalia, to countries like Somalia, so that they trust us, so that they partner with our local communities. We have been living in a country, sorry, I will take 2 minutes because this touches me. We are working on a country that we have been receiving aid for last 30 years, and we have not seen the impact or any change to the lives and the livelihoods of our society. And this livelihood, the agriculture and the food security, particularly water, is extremely important for us. We have been experiencing drought in a very frequent, cycle. Like it used to be like 10 years or 15 years. Now it comes down to every other 2 years. So what do you think, particularly I wanted to hear from the FAO and the African Development Bank and all that, apart from those small projects, what other big programs that we can do for us to partner together in order to address the underlying causes instead of the signs of the problems? Thank you.
So a question to FAO, but also certainly to the banks. How to bring the investors to Somalia? Great.
Happened that I was overseeing Somalia as well. I think on investment, let me be frank and straight. In a country like Somalia, we have similar situations in Yemen and other countries that I oversee from the regional office. You would still need time to be able to set the credibility level, which is the country rating, to an attractive level to investors. Your only solution today is to get to multilateral insurance organizations. And you only have 2 that you can access now, and that's ISIC as part of the ISDB group and MIGA as part of the World Bank group. And these 2 can provide you a political risk insurance, and they're the only 2 that can provide to governments a political risk insurance that would promote investors to come into the country, and they insure the risks on the political side. You need to survive with this formula for some time until you manage to build your risk credibility and be able to get into a rating and stability. And that is otherwise you will live on your other biggest option, the diaspora. Somali diaspora can bring in, according to our early statistics, $10 billion a year to the country if they are provided with the right ones. So you need to also see how you attract Somali diaspora to come back and invest into the country, because there's a special attachment there with the diaspora. Now in the solutions, we maintained our office as FAO in Somalia, and we are interacting with them from the region on a daily basis. You mentioned the situation of insecurity in the country. You're talking about personal security or national security with all the ongoing conflicts in the rural regions. If you do not have a stability and hope for the rural community to provide their food and create jobs, you're always contributing to the insecurity indirectly, because you're availing those people as recruits or potential recruits for the different fighting groups. So stability is very much dependent on how much you invest, and you should not save on investing to the rural communities to be able to produce their own food and create jobs, because that will give them a good livelihood and also save them from being taken away by any other groups that will further instabilize the situation in the country. But of course there are quite large-scale programs together with the African Development Bank. On Somalia, World Bank also is engaged, and the UN agencies, and Somalia is part of the countries in the region, same as Yemen, receives a lot of support from the UN system in particular. I'm sure WFP has a lot there.
Yes, thank you. All right. The banker.
Yes, maybe just to add that from a practical point of view, I think from where we sit, we are an African bank and we understand the African challenges, the African risks. The practical solution that you need is a solution that requires the public sector, which is basically the government, the private sector, and the farmers working together. I think we'll share with you some of the things that we are doing under the Export Trading Companies Initiative. The private sector can come and probably facilitate the establishment of an export trading company, which will then contract the farmers to go and produce something. And then at the other level, you will need the government to provide all the assurances and the policy that is required to facilitate the goods that are traded. And then you need an offtake. I think World Food Program we need to discuss. I think this is a situation where you may need even an international entity that can guarantee that once products are produced by Somalia, who can actually offtake the products at what particular price. I think this is, Somalia is in our continent, Africa. We need to come up with practical solutions to help the Honorable Minister. You presented very practical challenges. This is where all the partners need to come together and come up with a practical solution. Private-public partnership, I think in my view, is the way to go to address those issues. Thank you.
What?
I will let the simultaneous interpreters drink water. I have been one. I know what this is. I believe Somalia needs a Somalia task force on climate crisis by all international institutions, banks, regional, international, United Nations, and all. Because there is no country like Somalia on earth. And that means the insecurity and climate insecurity and the insecurity, physical insecurity, and the weakness of institutions. We are trying our very best, but we have been dealing with a major terrorist organization that is just menace. Basically, there is a international peacekeepers from Africa. And we have multilateral organizations present in Somalia, but somehow the climate crisis, I mean, come on, the countries next to us who had government for for long, they cannot cope with climate crisis. So I think Somalia has the potentiality to invest. We have big private sector booming relatively, and I think the answer would be some sort of a specified approach to how Somalia climate crisis is averted and turn it into a beneficial enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now last question before we bring the farmers in.
We have
Yeah, thank you. I'm Kenneth King from Sierra Leone, a senior economist. And I'm happy that as part of the solution, we spoke about focusing on markets and market infrastructure. My question is, how do you think we can make market work for Africa?
Who wants to take that question? How can we make markets work for Africa? Yes.
Thank you very much. I think the main challenge with the African markets is right now they are actually fragmented. And that is one of the challenges that we've actually been seeing. And for you to be able to actually ensure that the private sector, the investors that are putting money, or even the small holder farmers that want to be able to take farming as a business, they really need to have a clear access to the market. So there's one thing to have the market, but also you need to look at how you facilitate people to access the market. And I can probably talk about many agreements that existed in regional economic communities. The market was there, but there was a challenge in accessing the market. Even if you look at the US under AGOA, the market was created, but how to access the market was also a practical challenge. So what we're actually trying to do with the AFCFTA Secretariat is to put in place market intelligence solutions under our Africa Trade Gateway, whereby we use artificial intelligence to be able to see what the buyer is looking for, what the seller has, or the farmer for that matter. Through that platform, using technology, we can actually provide market intelligence to the smallholder farmers, to the SMEs, to know where the market is. These are some of the solutions that we are putting in place to address the issue of the market. And of course, the solution that I talked about of aggregation, whether you do it physically or through some platforms. We've got those platforms under the African Trade Gateway. One of them is Strata Intelligence, which basically helps that aggregation and takes the products to the markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am sorry, I
can
think
I-
we have to close. Oh, you have an answer. All right.
Just to
one.
complement what my colleague here said, because it's not only about trade. There are enablers in agriculture that need to be also institutionalized. If a country does not have a proper phytosanitary standards and the proper livestock monitoring standards and vaccination programs, they won't be able to export one piece of meat out of the country. No one will get that. So that you need to engage into a lot of hygienic standard programs, standardization that would allow you to cross-border with these products. The trade facilitation would come in later together with the trade finance to enable you to access other markets and open the markets in Africa, but the standards and the well-being of the products, be it either plant or animal products or otherwise, need to meet the standards agreed within the region to be able to contribute to this. Thank you.
A lot of answers. Yes, Engineer Nasser.
Okay, in 30 seconds, just to answer a very excellent question, I will borrow an example of something that we are doing in the pharmaceutical industry. So we are currently working with the African Standard Organization and Afrexim Bank and Badia as part of the Arab Africa Trade Bridges Program to harmonize all the pharmaceutical and medical standards in Africa. This is a project that's taking 3 years. Now, what would this mean? It means that Africa as a continent would harmonize its own pharmaceutical and medical standards as they deal with the external world. Now, this would facilitate inter-African trade and intra-African trade. Now, if we borrow that model, I believe ensuring harmonized standards is key. So once you have harmonized standards within the continent, this also will help to make African markets work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm really sorry, but we have to move on, and I'm sure our panelists will be available to engage in a discussion after this session. Thank you very much, all panelists. We now proceed with a video from FAO, and then we will have a short discussion with the farmers. So thank you, panelists. Thank you very much for your engaged discussion.
Hello.
A group photo. A group photo. You need a woman in the middle, so between the two ministers.